Today's webinar is titled Adding a Social Dimension to Your Online Course, presented by Doug Gadomski. I'm going to pass it over now to our presenter. Thank you, Doug, for being here with us today to share your knowledge and experience with us, and we look forward to the presentation.
Thanks, Rio, and glad to be back. And so we'll kick things off here, add in a social dimension. So you might be thinking at this point, okay, like social media? What do you mean? And well, I guess you could use social media to do this, and we'll talk about that more. It goes way deeper than that. So off we go. First off, we'll be using Poll Everywhere. So either pull up the app on your phone or your tablet and or navigate in your browser to pollev.com and you can also do by text. The instructions are coming up on the next slide. Here we go. And it's Doug 313 with two G's. And I guess these days you can also do the QR code. QR codes are kind of funny. They were all the rage when they kind of first came along, and then they were pronounced all but dead. And suddenly they're pervasive in our society. So go figure. Of course, email is supposed to have been dead many times over. So technology changes and yet it doesn't. There we go. So first question in our poll, how many of you taught at least one online course? And I get the idea from this picture. This is probably something more like learning a second language kind of lab because everybody's got headsets on. But could be still an online course, which is a number of different things. So should be active now. Yeah, poll's locked. I can fix that. There, unlocked. There we go. Now you can answer. There we go. Wow, 50-50, more or less. Now, a little different from the way this poll usually goes. It often was a really small percentage when I first started doing this talk, and that's grown over time. Of course, a lot of us were thrust into teaching an online course, whether we wanted to or not, um, by a pandemic, and we had well, let's just safely say your results may have varied, um, but so it goes. All right, so in teaching your course, whether you were the instructor or the student, you ever have this feeling? Is anyone actually listening? How do I respond to that? How do I ask a question? How do I do any of that stuff that is pretty easy? And you raise your hand in a classroom, and the instructor may or may not pick you as far as how many hands go up at once. But we all know how to do that, and we learned how to do that at a very young age. But in an online environment, that isn't quite as intuitive always as it needs to be if it hasn't been planned out. So our next little poll question. Sometimes yes, no. All right. And of course, as we'll see, you don't need to be online to have that happen. Um, but it's easier to have this happen in an online environment. Of course, one of the I don't want to pick on them so much because so many of us are required to take this. Your FEMA ICS courses are really, they do what they're designed to do, and they do that fairly well. They impart some information to us. We get a certification or at least a familiarization, and you really got to wonder I wonder how many other people are taking this course. Wonder if anybody else has the same question, and that goes along. It's a very isolating experience. Of course, as the instructor, you may be wondering the same thing. I've had that happen before, particularly early on in a course when you ask a question and people don't respond, and that's a bit of an issue. So that leads us to really, is there anybody else out there? And follow on with the nature of this talk, learning is often a very social thing. Yeah, there are individuals that learn best on their own in a not very social setting, but there are lots of us that kind of need those other people and that feedback, or at least somebody to tell a good joke. All right, we've got a few objectives, so we'll talk about why this sense of isolation. We'll talk about a few terms, kind of from research and the dictionary, and social presence, transactional distance. So social presence, we will define that and talk about it. Transactional distance, same thing, and we'll talk about how to get past this hurdle. So that's kind of why we're here. So how can you use social learning to engage your learners? We joke about it a lot, but there's a lot of truth to it at the same time. You put a group of particularly young learners together, and they're all focused on the electronic device in their hand rather than sitting around a table and having a conversation. It's not that they can't, it's just their preferred way of doing things. So, how do you play into that? Um, and make things interesting, and for that matter, what do we mean by social? There's a social learning theory. I think it was Albert Bandura. Um, so the whole idea there is that you have to get the student's attention, impart some info, so you get them to focus on you. They retain the info that you've passed along. They reproduce that, and then based on that reproduction they may get some motivation. So to put this in kind of context, um, people pattern their behavior after role models, so we have to be that role model. That could be family members, and family members, hint hint, are probably the most influential, um, and stuff like that. So we tend to participate in activities and join groups that reinforce familiar behavior. And you could call that differential association. And Bandura in his learning theory suggested that observation and modeling play the primary role in why people learn. Well, it's really true in kids. And I mean, even language development, they're modeling what they hear. And of course, that gets us off to a TV show, at least an old one that maybe was rebooted here not all that long ago. That kids say the darndest things. You bet they're modeling what they hear, and based on whether they get scolded for that or laughed at and praised for that, me will motivate them to continue on with that behavior. So we're the instructors and the facilitators, so we have to pay attention to that modeling and that. So the basis behind that, people observe behavior, attitudes, and consequences of others, and then use that info to form their own actions. So how do we do that in person? Well, that comes a little more naturally and a little easier. In the context of distant learning, though, there's these terms that we have to define and have a look at and actually plan for. Uh, so here's a free text little poll. What does social meaning? What does social mean with regard to learning to you? Um, And I think I allowed you to, type in three terms. All right, interaction. I like that. Students, groups, others, collaboration. And, in an online environment, these are all things that we need to pay attention to as we plan out our um, online offering, and whether that is just a webinar like this or a full class, whether that's one semester, two, a whole year, continuing things down. Part of teaching online is being, well, that hyper organized person that gets better at their teaching because they're thinking of all these interactions. Um, So I think I saw synergy. Yeah, synergy came up in there. Great term and a great idea that we sort of feed off of each other. One of the first online classes I ever took was um, at the university here, and we didn't have video, we didn't even have voice. Everything had to be done by text, and we had the most incredible interactions doing that. So, it's great when you've got Zoom, Skype, any other number of platforms to be more in person like, but carefully choosing things is and planning them out is really helpful. All right, so social learning is a big deal. All right. And so what we'll talk about is how to fill the void. And, again, in the classroom, that seems natural. We put people around tables in groups and ask them to work on projects together. And there's a lot of exchange of information and synergy and all that stuff that goes on, but not always. So even in a classroom, you can feel totally isolated and all by yourself. It's no fun to be the one that nobody asks to be in a group. And I think yesterday caught that it was somebody mentioned that I was listening to a talk, and somebody mentioned that um, they had somebody who was usually really introverted and, usually didn't participate. And for maybe the first time, this student got asked to join a group and the group members were excited to have him there. And this guy just opened up and bloomed. And the other instructor I was talking to really thought it was just blown away by how that happened. And one of the things online teaching does for us is it removes a few barriers. It creates some, to be sure, and we'll talk about that, but it also removes some. It can remove gender barriers. It can remove distance barriers. It can even remove cultural barriers, or at least minimize them. So there's a lot to this. So social presence in a nutshell is the awareness of the other person in a communication interaction. So whether I'm typing a text or in a chat box, it has a certain degree of awareness. Like I said, the FEMA stuff, virtually no awareness there. And otherwise, to various, let me go back onto this graphic here before I go on to that. Telepresence, which involves social presence a lot, um, sort of the all-encompassing that. So whatever method we're using kind of fits into this sphere of stuff. So if we look at social presence as a continuum, then totally text-based stuff like read this textbook chapter and take a quiz and never interact with anybody, that would be the least social present. Face to face, even in an online setting, would give us the most. So, video can help a lot. Um, so it's really become or come to be viewed as the way we represent themselves in their online environment. How many of you have an avatar of yourself in any of your online accounts? And the next question now, do you have an avatar, but how closely does it resemble you? Or is it something that comes out completely different, and is well, your alter ego. So you may be really quiet and introverted in person, but um, your online persona is uh, anything but introverted. And sometimes that happens. And it's one of the neat things about online teaching is that it gives the opportunity for people like the student I was referring to go from being the wallflower in the back of the classroom who doesn't interact much to that little bit of anonymity that goes along with being online. It suddenly takes down those barriers, and they literally, to use the term wallflower, they blossom. They really do. So it's a personal stamp that says you're available and willing to engage and connect and with other people in your online community. And one term that comes up as far as online communities is um, a learning community or communities of learning. Uh, so that is a big deal. So whether it's your picture using video like we're utilizing right now, or an avatar, it's kind of interesting now. Some studies are showing now that people have a huge preference for video versus their um, avatar. There we go. So, all right. So we're all different, and we come in lots of shapes and sizes and colors and different learning abilities and all that. But like I said, when in a social setting, particularly online, this comes together much more easily. Um, so social presence is demonstrated by the way messages are posted and how those messages are interpreted by others. So that brings up kind of the okay, how are the messages posted? And one of the things, okay, let's back this up. In a classroom, we blurt out an answer, and it may be right or wrong. But one of the nice things about particularly asynchronous environments is that it gives students, and that's where, let's say, using a threaded message board to exchange messages. I now, in that environment, have the opportunity to research what I'm going to say before I throw my 2 cents worth in and validate it and reword it. And who knows, maybe even use AI to produce it. But that says a lot about the way I get perceived online. So it defines how participants relate to one another and affects their ability to communicate effectively. So, it's great when you take the time and make the effort to do this, how things come together in this environment. All right. So here's the kicker. We seldom consider this. At least in our online course design, at least intentionally consider it. Maybe it's part of a package we are given, things like that. Um, so, hey, Rio, can we pause the video for just a second?
Sure.
All right. So, the problem again is that we don't intentionally design this into our course. So, and without it, learning interaction suffers. We don't get the modeling we were talking about, and that has a negative effect on learning performance. And this isn't a new idea; it's been around for a while. Um, so part of that social presence is a term or a concept called transactional distance. And that was actually developed back in the 1970s by Michael Moore, who happens to still be around. The fact is, I just reviewed a and yeah, Jeffrey, I'll put that back up. Um, so um, just got to review a proposal for an update on one of his textbooks that I evaluated. So that was pretty cool. Kind of got to interact with one of my, well, distance ed heroes, I guess. So that was pretty neat. It was, and you think about it, 1970s. Wait a minute, that was before the internet. Not necessarily before computers, although most of the computers at that time were mainframe computers and all that. So, when we're talking about technology, we were talking about other stuff like radio type instruction, PBS instructional programs, so television, closed circuit TV, all of so the idea that we have now of distance education was a little different. So it at least was the first theory derived from looking at teaching and learning utilizing technology. And so it states that when us, well, may not necessarily be us. It may be the person you have across the table from you who's actually an instructional designer and you're just the instructor. And that's actually a good person to have at you may be the subject matter expert, but you may not be the instructional designer, particularly when it comes to designing something for online learning. Got really lucky here at the University of New Mexico because our distance ed folks or the learning management system support folks, the ones that maintained it, had a really robust set of instructional designers that would sit down at a table and help you make decisions that resulted in what we see in the bottom of the screen, figure on the next slide. But um, there's a certain amount of structure that goes into the course, and you can over structure things and make it so it overwhelms, so that there is to the point where there's little dialogue and little learner autonomy. And that's not ideal. If there's too much dialogue, then the structure and the autonomy fail. If there's too much autonomy, then maybe you don't get the results you want. So this is a good person. This will be the person that tells you, wow, I really like that idea, but our system is not capable of doing that. Good to know that before you start the class, right? All right. So, to kind of reiterate that, we want to find that balance where we have just the right amount of dialogue, an appropriate amount of structure, and our student has some freedom to learn. You know, maybe they don't, well, we all tend to gravitate towards the method of learning that we know best or that we function best at. So if I get most out of an audio book, then I'm going to look for that. If I'm a person who actually gets something out of reading a textbook or the most out of it, then great. If I'm somebody who needs a group to function, then I'll look towards that. Um, and you kind of get the idea, right? So all these variables react and interact to create what we describe as transactional distance. And back in the 70s, he defined it as a psychological and communication space to be crossed. This applies to a classroom too, and it certainly is a space of misunderstanding or potential misunderstanding. Um, and think about that potential misunderstanding. How many of you have had a text message misinterpreted? Well, many times, right? Um, so this can happen. You think you, as an instructor, um, done a great job of um, planning everything out and have it all ready to go. And sure enough, you post it and nobody's getting the message. Nobody's following the instructions. So yeah, there is some misunderstanding, and sometimes that results in a bad grade. So you kind of have to get into where your student is. So, um, Jeffrey, were you talking about the QR code for the poll everywhere? Okay, great. If you'll all be patient, I will back up a number of slides all the way to that. Getting close. There we go. Did you get that? I really like being able to watch the chat box, guys. There you go. All right. So back to our slide. So, in other words, transactional distance or planning for that provides us some guidance about course design. If we give it some thought, just like social interaction, um, we can make that kind of neat. Well, this guy named Zhang built on this and developed a 31 element scale of transactional distance in 2003. And yeah, it's a challenge to read through, but subsequently that was revised down to 12 elements, which is much more manageable. Uh, so, all right. So in a classroom, it's easy to have a low transactional distance, have a learner engaged, but we know that's not always the case. Sometimes all the students have their heads on the table and are sound asleep. And that says they're not engaged, they're not asking appropriate questions, they're connected to the learning environment. If you allow electronic devices in your classroom, maybe they're just reading their email instead. And that's not what we want. So the deal here is we want to avoid that disengaged, uh, disconnected student in a learning environment, whether it's in person or online. And since talk is aimed more at online, this becomes doubly important, if not more so. All right, so we got something that looks, if you were at last week's webinar, then this should look familiar. But since we plan these as possibly standalone, we'll look at this. So the four interactions we plan as far as interaction wise is, do students have the ability to interact with each other? Can they interact with the instructor? And how do they interact with the content? And lastly, how do they interact with the media? One of the problems, particularly these days, is we don't always give thought to bandwidth requirements. And this is why that IT person at the planning table is such an important key member. If we do this all right, we end up with that happy camper, that happy learner right in the middle of things. And um, so let's break these down. Student to student, in what ways can your students interact with each other? Well, if I want to ask questions about transactional student distance between students, does it allow them to get along well, or maybe not so well with their classmates? Does it help them feel valued by other class members? Um, do the other classmates value my ideas and opinions very highly? And this is where that asynchronous kind of environment can come in really handy because given the time, you can really shine as a class, as in a student. There we go. And do my classmates respect me in this online class? And are they supportive of my ability to make my own decisions? In other words, do I have a little bit of autonomy? Uh, so we have to plan this out, whether it's synchronous, like right now, where we're all online at the same time, or in a way asynchronous. Maybe I'm watching this recording later down the road. And so asynchronous would be not online at the same time. So we have some decisions to make. And if we look at how we address transactional distance between the instructor and the students, does the student feel like the instructor doesn't pay any attention to them at all? They just come on, deliver content, and go away. Well, that can happen in a big classroom too. Just think of freshman English. Not much interaction or attention, and a TA is doing all the grading, and you kind of wonder, was we all like to, if we get back to that social learning theory, we want to observe some behavior, maybe model it and reproduce it, and that's kind of the idea. Um, do we get prompt feedback from the instructor on their academic performance, or do they have to wait to the end of the semester to find out they failed the first test? Prompt feedback is important. Um, is the instructor helpful and available? Can they be turned to when you need some help in the course? I always try and be that person, whether it's students individually or the class as a whole. Um, so we have to answer those questions. Have you planned out how your students are going to interact with the content in your online offering? And stuff like user interface makes a difference. How many clicks does it take to get to an assignment? Or is it easy to find or buried somewhere where half the students are entirely missing it? There's some science behind that. Um, and that makes a difference. Do they have to scroll forever to get today's assignment, or does it appear at the top of the page when a new assignment's posted? Do they get a push notification that a new assignment's been posted? And for a lot of learning management systems, that's a checkbox or a radio button that we go in and or a feature that we activate, and we have to give it some thought. It isn't necessarily on by default. So does this course emphasize synthesizing and organizing ideas? Wait a minute. Shouldn't we all be looking for our students to do that, synthesizing higher level learning concepts? Um, do they synthesize information? Or they take it all in? Experienced? Do they are they developing the ability to synthesize this stuff into new, more complex interpretations and relationships? And does this course emphasize making judgments about the value of information? Oh, wow, that's a big key thing for artificial intelligence right now. Making judgments about the value and the validity of the information our students are getting off the internet. Um, can they make arguments about how others have gathered and incorporate data? Can they assess the soundness of their conclusions? this is where we want our students. And we have to plan that in. Does this course emphasize applying theories? And, at the very least, Bloom's taxonomy wise, we want to get our students to the applying theories and concepts, but we'd love to see them at a higher level where they can synthesize and make judgments about things in new situations. Let's face it, in a lot of ways, the book goes out the window when we get out in the real world. So, have we managed to provide a nice array of reading assignments? So it's maybe not just the textbook assignments. Do we, make as optional reading certain web pages that we've gone out and curated, articles, research papers, all of that? Do we have additional videos besides the one of yours truly talking about the subject? Have we provided threaded discussions, particularly in an online environment? Do we assign appropriate homework? And of course, as far as that, um, is that how does the homework get turned in? Many times I've said, please turn it in a, say, Word document or a Pages document or a PDF, and only to have students turn it in something entirely different that I have no possibility of opening. So make it easy to turn the homework in. Success rates go way up. Do we ask our students to generate presentations on their own? And that falls right into do one, teach one kind of approach to things. But when you generate a presentation, you learn a lot about things as you do that and you assimilate a lot of that stuff. If you turn that generated presentation into a video assignment, and here I'll pick on an old one that goes back probably close to 15 years. A group of medical students generated a music video parody, I guess, about a cardiac rhythm, and it's you can find it on YouTube. It's Diagnosis Wanky Bach, and you think about that. Oh, looks like those people had a lot of fun doing this, but at the same time, I bet not one of them in that whole group will ever forget the material they had to cover and learn in doing this. So, Don, I got to agree. Recorded lectures that are old and dated has become frustrating, and of course, the onus on us is that we have to work to keep it fresh. So either finding new videos or updating our own. So have you considered whether your students are accessing this content on a mobile device like a cell phone or even a laptop with a small screen, or are they on a desktop with, well, a huge monitor? It makes a difference, and that may make a difference in your planning as to even font size you choose for your presentation. Finally, students have to interact with the media. So, is it difficult to pay attention to the instructor in this web environment, or is there a way to interact with them? Do you, as a student, have access to the web resources you need, and how are they provided? Um, I want to see something like the fact that I'm online doesn't inhibit my class participation. That's made clear and pretty easy. Um, do we have an efficient system provided for students and an instructor to exchange materials? That gets back to turning in your homework. Is your student comfortable with using the computer? And I hate to be cliche or buy into a common thing, but older students may have that problem. Uh, does your student absolutely hate using the web and wish this was a face-to-face class? Um, So how are you going to ease that blow? Um, I've had students that I had to teach how to do this stuff, with a sit down session with them one on one, and never be demeaning and all that. Just as, everybody started at zero and we all learned to do this in our own time. And now's your time. So let's make the most of it. Uh, was it easy to use the technology involved in the class, or is that in itself a huge challenge? Um, and hopefully what we don't have is the flip side of that, that the technology in the course is difficult to learn and use, which means, of course, nobody's going to use it. So again, access issues, how, what type of device is bandwidth an issue? When you get out to marginal cell phone areas, that's a big deal in New Mexico. There are lots of areas where there is no cell phone coverage. So bandwidth is, well, a barrier too. What are computer requirements? That's a great thing to point out. I teach an ed tech course as part of our degree program, and one of the things we do is explore virtual worlds. One of the problems with virtual worlds is they tend to be resource hogs as far as your computer goes. Most desktops handle it no problem. Inexpensive laptops are going to struggle, and that leads to a dissatisfying um, sort of experience for your student. Um, and of course, what learning management system limitations. So it may be provided for you. You may have no choice, but you may be using something free to do your course, like Google Classroom, or you may have something like Canvas or Blackboard to do that. That's usually fairly feature rich and can be made overly feature rich. So uh, you have to consider all that. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is learner emotions. One of the big ways we evaluate learning is not only by the benchmarks we create and have to meet as far as our curriculum and certification and licensing goes, but the way we often evaluate learning is, how did you feel about this? So your learners' feelings actually have some impact on that. So if they've had a bad previous experience, they're bringing that baggage into your course too. And it really affects their motivation and self-regulation. And let's face it, in online courses, it takes a bit more self-regulation and discipline to stay engaged and keep up with what's going on. So we consider something now called emotional presence. And it's the outward expression of emotion, affect, and feeling by individuals. And okay, how do you do that? How do I evaluate that in an online course? Um, it's actually surprisingly easy. And I've actually had students that, because we included that in planning, got, well, a little bit of an intervention, and to make sure, because you find some dark thoughts creeping into their comments. So that can be really helpful. So when it comes to the social presence, cognitive presence, teaching, and emotional presence, all fit into things. And then, of course, that helps support things and helps us select content and give feedback and helps us create a learning climate. If I look at this Venn diagram, that's a pretty small sweet spot right in the middle, but it is achievable. So, how do we improve our social presence? Well, there's 7 things. One is encouraging our learners to incorporate feelings, experiences, examples, and ideas in their works of completion. In other words, their assignments. This is adult learning. It's not just about meeting the minimum work requirements. We have to frequently promote them to bring or encourage them to bring what they have to the table and share from their own experiences. And adult learners got to do this. They really do. If you don't plan on allowing that, they're going to suffer for it. So uh, we also have to give some visual feedback. There we go. Video feedback can be really important. Now, I put an asterisk by this because your learning management system may support this and it may not. One of the things that I used to love, because for a while, the LMS we were using at UNM did support it. And I would have actually, it had also an audio support deal. So I would ask students to post a response to the threaded discussion, just one response, and then they had to get feedback from their peers or give feedback to their peers. And so you'd read another student's deal and then post a little audio message about this. And one of the things, if we think about it, is this helps them synthesize the information from their peers' post and then have to condense it down into a short, say, 2 to 3 minute response. And that goes by quick. And what's this most resemble? A radio report. Wow. So I could develop radio report giving skills simply by giving these kind of opportunities to my students. And of course, an instructor, this is great too. But if your class has much size to it, um, this can be painful if you've got a big class. All right. Incorporate their personal profiles and photos. A lot of learning management systems don't allow this anymore. It's about student privacy. And let's face it, there were a few stalkers that came into this. So while this helps improve social presence, it doesn't necessarily mean we can do it. But one of the things you can do this to get around this is do an icebreaker exercise as your first threaded discussion. So tell me about why you in this class, how much experience you may have in EMS, and what you hope to get out of it, kind of thing. So um, that really helps everybody get to know each other. So we make sure that messages are respectful, positive, encouraging, timely, and frequent. Particularly in the timely and frequent part, that's part of the grading rubric for their threaded discussions. So you got to be proactive here. One of the ways you can be proactive is that you ask the students to submit the rules, if you will, that help do this. And since they're submitting them, they have big buy-in to stuff they submit. And no big surprise, they often submit the stuff you would come up with anyway. But since they're coming up with these ideas, at least in their mind, they interact more respectfully. So be positive to your students' needs. So not only do we as instructors value the timeliness of all this, but your students really appreciate the information feedback. So they acknowledge that important and understand the expectations. It helps prompt feedback helps us meet due dates. It means that they know we value their performance and are there to help them improve. That's part of our job, right? Um, it means that their work is given priority and helps them make adjustments as their course or training advances. We can ensure the quality of the media we're using. Nobody wants to see a pixelated video with a audio you can't understand. So we need to promote things like physical distance, eye contact, smiling, social cues, stuff that enhances the social presence of learning. So we have to be careful with our instructions on how to make good videos, especially when it comes to high definition stuff. and that helps provide a richer environment, social presence wise. And finally, our seven things, encourage learners to evaluate their positive and negative feelings. And this gets back to the emotional presence part of that. So all this is more important than you think. So when it comes to journaling, one of my favorite things is that, and this is literally copied and pasted from my journaling assignment. And depending on the class, journaling may I will do if it's a semester long class, there's a weekly journaling requirement. If this is a course that I may do, like an EMT course where we're working in blocks, I may only ask for a journal entry once for each block. So it may cover a number of chapters, but it demonstrates your thoughts, knowledge, and critical thinking about the course so far. And what do we write about? It's pretty straightforward. What did you learn in class this week? This is more than just what I did on my summer vacation. It's what did you learn? It's not that I learned that the knee bone is connected to the thigh bone. No, it's got to be more than that. Why is it important to your patient care? How does this change your understanding about and thinking about pathophysiology, for instance, or why we provide some of the treatment we do, and how does it impact what you do on the job, and will this change your practice as a provider? So, threaded discussions. This is, like I said, the icebreaker. Um, if you could identify one thing in EMS or an EMS system that is most important and elaborate, can it be improved? And there's due dates, requirements to respond to your peers, all of that in threaded discussions. And of course, group projects, we can certainly do that. That's a big yes. And example generated presentations, student generated scenarios. Why is that good? It's because they have to go learn what's normal as far as vital signs and what's the abnormal part of a given condition for the scenario they're developing. Um, Regular synchronous sessions like this resemble live classrooms. It can be expensive, believe it or not, if you're using Zoom as an institution, that's a big chunk of money. Or you can do something for free. There are lots of systems out there that allow that. Um, Students in this environment thrive on the immediacy of it. In other words, in a classroom, I get to throw my hand up right away and get to answer a question. And, there's always that student in the class going, pick me, pick me, pick me. I got the answer. I got the answer. And as an instructor, we're going, no, it's got to be somebody else I can pick. Uh, but there are students in any group that thrive on that. And this is by having regular synchronous sessions, these students get their chance to thrive. And then the wallflowers get a chance to shine in the asynchronous sessions, and everybody gets what they want. And these can be really handy as far as everybody reading your facial expressions, the tone in your voice, and all that that may be missing from text-based stuff. You can share screens and graphics, and that can be kind of handy. So they provide us also with the opportunity to read all this stuff in our students. So planning your online courses, we need to include the three terms we covered the most. Think about immediacy and intimacy, and how much we close that gap. These are much more than just terms in a dictionary. They have an impact on your students' learning. And we remember those four important interactions, will do great. So, our next poll question, you feel better? Hey, maybe just one person, but at least one person feels better. Uh, all right. All right, looks like nobody's afraid this time. And whoops, there we go. Last slide. There we go. Thank you very much. My email's up in the corner there, so feel free to copy that down. If you got a question, I'll be glad to reply. And just don't expect an instant reply. I only check my email once or twice a day, so mostly unless I'm expecting something. But I'd love your feedback and things like that. And, we all, both as instructors and students, feel better about learning when we feel like we've been heard. So plan that into your course and improve things. So thanks, Steve. All right, open it up for any questions. Evidently, one of my dogs has a question. All right. Thanks, Robert. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up. And thanks, everybody. Richard, Robert, Vincent, Brian.